a funny way we do with regard to Russia. I think a
Yes.
lot of American foreign policy elites have been unable to get it out of their heads that the Cold War is over with and that Russia does not equal the Soviet Union. Russia is not a threat to conquer all of Ukraine, much less a big chunk of Eastern Europe, much less all of Europe. We should have good relations with the Russians. Ukraine should be firmly intact. And the fact that we're in this totally disastrous situation today in Ukraine is in large part because of our inability to work with the Russians.
The Ukraine crisis represents a critical failure of Western strategy, particularly NATO's handling of Russia's security concerns. At the core of this issue is NATO's miscalculation of Russia's resolve in Eastern Europe, an error that has not only destabilized Ukraine but now threatens global security. NATO's expansion eastward, especially its overtures to bring Ukraine into its sphere, has been perceived by Russia as an existential threat. This misreading of Russia's stance has led to disastrous consequences, pushing the world closer to a larger conflict. Since 2014, NATO has increased its military presence in Eastern Europe, with over 40,000 troops stationed near Russia's borders today. Despite repeated warnings from Russia, NATO's actions have deepened tensions, leading to the current crisis. Mearsheimer argues that this escalation could have been avoided if the West had recognized Russia's red lines, particularly regarding NATO's expansion. The West's economic sanctions, over 10,000 in total, have done little to deter Russia, while Ukraine continues to suffer heavy losses. The U.S. has sent more than $50 billion in military aid to Ukraine, yet key cities like Bakhmut and Kherson remain under siege. Despite the deployment of advanced NATO weapons, Ukrainian forces are still outgunned by Russian artillery. In this video, we will analyze how NATO's decision to dismiss Russia's strategic concerns and its failure to adapt to Russia's evolving posture have led to the current disaster. Russia's intensified military campaign in eastern Ukraine has brought the conflict to a critical turning point, with the risk of further escalation looming large. Mearsheimer's predictions about NATO's role in exacerbating the crisis are playing out, as Russia focuses on solidifying control over key eastern regions like Donetsk and Luhansk. The conflict's volatility continues to grow, underscoring the consequences of NATO's failure to address Russia's security concerns and its ongoing eastward expansion. As of October 2024, Ukraine is facing mounting military pressure on the Eastern Front. Russian forces have significantly escalated their artillery and missile strikes, particularly around the fiercely contested city of Bakhmut. Reports indicate daily Russian attacks exceeding 50 strikes, with Ukrainian military casualties surging. More than 2,000 units lost in the last month alone, reflecting the brutal toll of the war. The humanitarian cost is equally devastating. The United Nations estimates that over 9,700 civilians have been killed since the war's start, with millions displaced. Key cities like Mariupol and Severodonetsk have been decimated, leaving Ukraine's infrastructure crippled, with over $300 billion in damage, as reported by the World Bank. These figures underscore the catastrophic consequences for Ukraine's future and sovereignty. NATO's response has drawn sharp criticism, especially from analysts like Mearsheimer, who argue that its expansion and failure to engage diplomatically with Russia worsened the conflict. Ukraine's NATO aspirations, formalized in September 2022, have only deepened the geopolitical divide. Russia has long warned that NATO membership for Ukraine would cross a red line, and the subsequent invasion has plunged the region into chaos. The situation in Ukraine's eastern regions remains dire, as Russian forces continue their aggressive push in Donetsk and Luhansk. Russian artillery strikes, particularly around Bakhmut and Avdiivka, have escalated, further stretching Ukraine's defenses. These relentless assaults have placed immense pressure on Ukraine's military, particularly as key strategic positions are under threat. Despite significant Western military support, including advanced systems like HIMARS, Ukraine struggles to counter Russia's superior firepower and evolving tactics. Russia's ability to adapt to NATO-supplied weaponry has blunted the effectiveness of Western aid, revealing a critical gap in NATO's strategy. Mearsheimer's critique of NATO's miscalculation of Russia's resolve holds true, as Ukraine faces increasing difficulties in holding ground while Russia makes incremental territorial gains. In the south, the situation has worsened for Ukraine. Since late 2023, Russian forces have expanded their control over parts of Kherson, a strategic region, due to its proximity to Crimea and the Black Sea. As of October 2024, Russia has fortified key positions, making it difficult for Ukrainian forces to launch effective counteroffensives. Control over Kherson and the southern coast continues to be pivotal for Ukraine's economic and military operations. Russia's control of this region threatens to cut off Ukraine's access to critical supply lines and the Dnipro River, further isolating Ukrainian forces in the east. Despite sporadic Ukrainian counterattacks, Russia has managed to maintain its grip, further weakening Ukraine's strategic position. NATO's failure to adequately respond, combined with slow-moving aid, has exacerbated the challenges Ukraine faces in both defending territory and maintaining its sovereignty. The critical question now is not only whether Ukraine can withstand Russia's continued aggression, but how this conflict will reshape the geopolitical landscape. At the heart of the crisis lies Russia's determination to prevent Ukraine from becoming a NATO-aligned state, which Moscow has long perceived as a direct threat to its sphere of influence. John Mearsheimer has consistently argued that NATO's eastward expansion, particularly the 2008 Bucharest summit promise of eventual membership for Ukraine, was a strategic error. In his view, this expansion is what provoked Russia into drastic actions, culminating in the current war. Mearsheimer's analysis underscores NATO's failure to account for Russia's security concerns. The 2008 promise of NATO membership for Ukraine has been a red line for Moscow, resulting in repeated warnings and eventual military action, first in Georgia in 2008, then Crimea in 2014, and now the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. NATO's continued military support for Ukraine, including advanced weaponry and billions in aid from the U.S., has not deterred Russia, but instead reinforced its belief that the West is encroaching on its security interests. By October 2024, NATO's military aid has included advanced air defense systems and precision weapons, but Russia has adapted to many of these, blunting their impact. Mearsheimer's critique highlights that NATO's refusal to reconsider Ukraine's potential membership has pushed Russia into a more aggressive posture, turning the conflict into a long-term strategic standoff. The broader implications for Europe are significant. Over 8 million Ukrainian refugees have put a massive strain on NATO member states, particularly in Eastern Europe, where resources are being stretched thin. Additionally, Europe's move to phase out Russian energy, a goal set to be completed by the end of 2024, has led to significant economic disruption, with energy prices remaining volatile and inflation affecting major European economies. These challenges have created internal pressures within NATO, complicating efforts to maintain a unified response to Russia. The risk of further escalation remains high. Both NATO and Russia have increased their military readiness, with Russia continuing to signal potential nuclear escalation if it perceives an existential threat. NATO, in turn, has bolstered its deterrence measures, conducting more frequent military exercises and preparing for worst-case scenarios. This precarious balance has heightened tensions and increased the likelihood of miscalculation, with neither side showing signs of compromise. Mearsheimer's warnings about NATO's missteps are no longer theoretical. They are unfolding in real time. The continued refusal to address Russia's core security concerns has trapped both NATO and Russia in a dangerous cycle of escalation. The possibility of the conflict expanding beyond Ukraine, dragging Europe into a wider war, feels more likely as the situation deteriorates. With no clear path toward de-escalation, the future of European security remains uncertain, and the consequences of further miscalculations could be catastrophic. John Mearsheimer has long criticized NATO's eastward expansion, arguing that it would provoke a severe response from Russia. His theory of offensive realism posits that great powers, like Russia, are highly sensitive to potential threats near their borders. NATO's push to include Ukraine, he argues, has been perceived by Moscow as a direct challenge to its sphere of influence, leaving Russia feeling cornered. In recent interviews, Mearsheimer reiterated that while President Putin's actions are aggressive, they were a predictable response to NATO's encroachment. Mearsheimer identifies the 2008 Bucharest summit, where NATO promised eventual membership to Ukraine and Georgia Georgia as a critical moment that set the stage for the current war. For Russia, the prospect of a NATO-aligned Ukraine on its doorstep was intolerable. The situation worsened after the 2014 pro-Western shift in Ukraine's government, which led to Russia's annexation of Crimea and eventually the full-scale invasion in 2022. As of October 2024, Mearsheimer warns that if NATO continues to ignore Russia's security concerns, the conflict could spiral out of control. Russia has consistently framed NATO's expansion as an existential threat, and its military doctrine emphasizes the use of force if necessary to defend against it. The risk of the war expanding into neighboring NATO countries, such as Poland or the Baltic states, remains a significant concern. Any Russian move in these areas could trigger NATO's Article 5, plunging the alliance into a broader war. Mearsheimer, along with other experts like Stephen Walt and George Beebe, has also raised alarm over Russia's nuclear posturing. Russia has conducted several nuclear-capable missile tests as Western countries continue to supply Ukraine with advanced weapons. Mearsheimer warns that the longer NATO dismisses Russia's grievances, the more likely it becomes that miscalculations could lead to catastrophic escalation. Mearsheimer argues that without a meaningful shift in NATO's strategy, such as offering concessions regarding Ukraine's NATO membership or addressing Russia's broader security concerns, the conflict could become prolonged and more dangerous. The continued military standoff, with neither side willing to back down, increases the risk of a wider war that could threaten both European and global stability. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and subscribe for more videos. Thank you.